Religion is the opium of the people. If you've never heard of Karl Marx, I'm still sure you've heard this one particular quotation of his. And it might have given you the impression that the main body of Marx's work was a criticism of religion. In fact, in the Muslim world, this is quite commonly known or thought of being true, that Marx's main purpose was to criticize religion. In fact, when we go through the works of Karl Marx, we find that he has written very little directly on religion. Mostly he's written on history or philosophy or a critique of political economy. And there are really, honestly speaking, only a few passages where Marx writes on religion. One of these famous passages from where this quote comes from is his work in 1843, which is a contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. At the time that Marx was writing, that is in 1843, the work of Ludwig Feuerbach had just come out, The Essence of Christianity, only a year or two before, in 1841. And Marx was deeply, deeply influenced by Feuerbach's view of religion. And you must remember from one of my previous lectures, I'm sure, that Feuerbach's assessment of religion was rather positive. Even though Feuerbach himself is against theology, he is not necessarily against religion because he considers religion to be, or he considers Christianity to be, the externalization of man's highest aspirations, of his very species being, of what man dreams about. And hence Feuerbach famously said that he's not an atheist, because to deny God would be to deny that which man aspires to become. In other words, to deny God would be to deny man, and therefore he does not consider himself an atheist. And he thought that religion, that is Feuerbach thought that religion is really all about love, about wisdom, about community, about coming together and so on. And if we recognized the anthropological essence of religion, we would recognize that religion is really an inverted consciousness about man, and we would recognize therefore what it is that man desires and externalizes in the form of religion. Now, when we read Karl Marx in the context of Feuerbach's writing on religion, you will see how heavily Marx is influenced by this thought. Marx wrote in his famous essay, A Contribution to the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, in 1843 that, and I quote, "The foundation of irreligious criticism is man makes religion, religion does not make man." That is, of course, the atheist point of view. Marx continues, "Religion is indeed the self-consciousness and self-esteem of man, who has either not yet won through to himself or has already lost himself again." Let me pause here and explain to you what Marx here is saying is very Feuerbachian, in the sense that Marx is saying religion is not irrational, as many of our liberals like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins sort of say. What he's suggesting is that religion is the self-consciousness and self-esteem of man. But this self-consciousness of man, this self-esteem of man, has been given a form which is external to man in the form of what we worship, what mankind worships. And in that sense, we fail to recognize that what we are in fact worshipping is the externalization of our own self-consciousness, of our own self-esteem. And therefore, in that sense, this is humanity that has not won through to himself, or a man that has not won through to himself, or has lost himself again. In what sense does Marx mean that? In the sense that mankind is not being able to recognize that what man is really worshipping is his own self-consciousness, his own self-esteem, his own best aspirations. By man here, and I'm using the word man and his, but really what Marx means is mankind, humanity as a whole. Let's continue. But man is no abstract being squatting outside the world. Man is the world of man, state, society. This state and this society produce religion, which is an inverted consciousness of the world, because they are an inverted world. Let me pause here again. Now, that's very, very interesting. What Marx here is suggesting is that although Feuerbach is right in saying that religion is the externalization of man's consciousness, self-consciousness, aspirations, and so on and so forth, but man's aspirations are not some unified thing that have existed in the same way for all of history. Because man is not, as he puts it, squatting outside the world. Man is within a state, within a certain kind of society, within a certain kind of economy. And it is within the paradoxes and contradictions of that state and of that specific society and of that specific kind of economy and of that the specific material conditions of that society that man's aspirations also take root. Therefore, man's aspirations will change with time as the state changes, as society changes, religion will also change. Now, Marx continues by saying that this state and this society, the very material state and society in which man lives, produce religion as an inverted consciousness of the world. What does an inverted consciousness of the world mean? It means that it's inverted in the sense that it's like a mirror. Religion is like a mirror shown to man, or man is looking at a mirror. And what is man seeing in the mirror? Mankind's own aspirations. So in that sense, it's an inverted consciousness. But why is this consciousness inverted? Marx asks, because the world itself is inverted. It is an inverted world. Now, this is a very interesting idea. What does Marx mean by the phrase the world is inverted? Let's keep in mind that this book he's writing is really a critique of Hegel. And so when Marx uses the term that the world itself is inverted, we can take this in from a Hegelian point of view. What Hegel meant when he said that the world was inverted was that mankind had failed to recognize that mankind is the subject of history. In the way in which history has been conceived so far, history is something that is done to us. It is almost as if it is external to mankind. But what in the master-slave dialectic of Hegel emerges at the end of this dialectic is the recognition by the slave, and therefore by the majority of mankind, that they themselves are the subject of history. So in what sense is the world inverted for Marx? And why is the world felt to be inverted by mankind? Marx says it is inverted in the sense that the very subject of history considers himself or herself, or mankind considers itself to be the object of history, rather than history to be nothing other than what mankind's own activities. So why is this inverted? Why does mankind think of itself as not being the subject of history, but as the object of history? Although he doesn't mention it here, but he talks about it in many other places. He says because we seem to have no control over history. History seems to be something that is done to us rather than something that we do, although it is something that we are doing, and yet we seem to have, it's like a monster that's out of our control. We can't really direct it in any conscious way, or even though it does have a direction, it has a pattern, but that pattern and that direction does not seem to be in our control. We don't think that we are in control of our own history. And why is it that we don't feel that we are in control of our own history? Well, that has to do with the way in which class society is structured, the exploitation of people, the way in which they are oppressed, that the majority of people feel that history is something done to them rather than something that they are actively part of. That is something that is nothing other than their action. So Marx continues, religion is, he explains, the general theory of this world. Its encyclopedic compendium, its logic in popular form, its spiritual point of honor, its enthusiasm, its moral sanction, its solemn complement, and its universal basis of consolation and justification. It is the fantastic realization of the human essence, since the human essence has not acquired any true reality. Wow, now this does not sound like a negative appraisal of religion at all. To say that religion is our enthusiasm, it is our moral sanction, solemn complement, universal basis of consolation and justification, and so it is the very essence of humanity, the fantastic realization of the human essence. By fantastic, he means, of course, a realization which occurs in the mind. So it is a realization in the thought process of the human essence. But why has this occurred to us as something that's external to us? Why is the human essence something that feels to us as being external? Because, he says, the human essence has not acquired any true reality. What does he mean by any true reality? Not that humanity doesn't exist, obviously, because he believes that it does exist, but in the sense that humanity has failed to recognize its own essence in the form of religion, in the form of God, in the form of what it worships. So this is very much, as you can see, inspired by Feuerbach. Then Marx continues, the struggle against religion is therefore indirectly the struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. In other words, what are the conditions in society that create the illusion that we are not the subjects of history, that mankind, that history is not something that we do, but is something that's done to us? What are the reasons for this inverted consciousness? Marx continues, religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Now this is a very, very interesting line, because what it shows is that Marx did not view religion merely as a functionist ideology that obfuscates the class relations of a society. It may do that, certainly, but that is not all that religion is, because religion is, for Marx, also the expression of the suffering of people. People's suffering is expressed in religion, in the way, specifically perhaps in Christianity, in the way that Christ suffers on the cross. He says, and it is also a protest against real suffering. The way in which humanity suffers, it raises its voice against that suffering through religion. Marx says religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition. It is the opium of the people. Now, when I end this paragraph, if I just read the last line, you may get the impression that Marx means that religion is like a hallucinogenic, like a drug that puts you into a stupor, that allows you to sort of dream, but it's not reality, etc. But if you more closely examine what Marx is saying and put Marx in his own time and context, you will recognize that opium in the time of Marx was not merely a recreational drug. It was a recreational drug. It was a legal drug at that time, but you may be surprised to discover that in the time of Karl Marx, opium was a drug that could be prescribed legally by doctors and hospitals for pain. Today we don't use opium anymore. Today opium is illegal in, I think, most countries of the world, if not all the countries of the world. But the plant that gives rise to opium and morphine, which is what we do use in hospitals today, is the same plant. It is poppy. So morphine is a different extract from the poppy plant, but it functions largely the same way as opium does, in the sense of numbing people's pain. And that is the sense in which Marx means religion is the opium of the people. Just read it in continuity and you see religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of a soulless condition, the opium of the people. In other words, religion is what gives people solace in this world in which there is so much pain and there is so much suffering. And religion plays the role in this world full of suffering of providing some solace to the poor, to the oppressed, that there will be justice in the end. But now Marx continues, the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. In other words, what Marx is saying is that what we really need to be demanding is the real happiness of people. To call on them, he continues, to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusion. The criticism of religion is therefore in embryo the criticism of that veil of tears of which religion is the halo. In other words, Marx is saying this world is a veil, a valley of tears. It is so full of suffering. And religion, it is through religion that humanity expresses its suffering and its protest against that suffering. But the point of view of Marx is to criticize religion is really not to criticize religion per se, as that is just, at least for Marx in this passage, the expression of man's inner desires, dreams, aspirations, as Feuerbach basically argued. But the real purpose ought to be to change the conditions of mankind, to change to alleviate the suffering of mankind, to make the world a better place. Marx says this very explicitly in the next paragraph. He says, criticism has plucked the imaginary flowers on the chain, not in order that man shall continue to bear that chain without fantasy or consolation, but so that he shall throw off the chain and pluck the living flower. What a beautiful phrase. What this means is that the purpose of criticism isn't to say to mankind that there is no hope, there is no justice in the end, and so on and so forth. No. It is to bring about justice in this world. And he continues, the criticism of religion disillusions man. Yes, it does. So that he will think, act, and fashion his reality like a man who has discarded his illusions and regained his senses, so that he will move around himself as his own true sun. Religion is only the illusory sun, which revolves around man as long as he does not revolve around himself. In other words, Marx's purpose in criticizing religion is only this, that we must destroy the circumstances in this society, in this world, that require us to have illusions. That we must destroy, in other words, the conditions and circumstances that result in humanity's enormous suffering and pain, exploitation and oppression. Marx continues, it is therefore the task of history, once the other world of truth has vanished, to establish the truth of this world. It is the immediate task of philosophy, which is in the surface of history, to unmask self-estrangement in its unholy forms, once the holy form of human self-estrangement has been unmasked. Thus, the criticism of heaven turns into the criticism of earth, the criticism of religion into the criticism of law, and the criticism of theology into the criticism of politics. In other words, you have to change the world as it actually exists, alleviate the suffering of mankind, eliminate the exploitation and oppression of mankind, eliminate the circumstances that have created the externalization of man's highest aspirations in the form of religion, not so that man can continue to suffer in silence without consolation, but so that mankind will no longer suffer. The real purpose, says Marx, of criticizing religion, if there is any at all, is to change the world today, to make the world a better place. Now you may say that is an astoundingly different interpretation of Marx's view on religion, and I think you may find it different because a lot of people, specifically on the internet, continue to think that Marx's appraisal of religion is entirely or wholly negative, and continue to equate the positions of radical atheists such as Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins and others with the position of Marxists. But Marx's position wasn't as simplistic as the position of Christopher Hitchens and others, who merely dismiss religion as an irrationality, as backwardness, as an anachronism or whatever. No, Marx's view, and the Marxist view really is that religion arises out of a necessity, a need, certain conditions, certain material conditions in this world, and what religion represents in the Feuerbachian sense is the externalizations of the dreams and hopes and aspirations of the people, the expression of their suffering and a protest against that suffering, and it gives them a certain amount of solace. And what Marx really wants is to eliminate the conditions that require people to have solace, to make people happy, to get rid of the exploitation and suffering and oppression of mankind. And you can see this thought taken forward by many other Marxists. For example, when Engels writes his famous essay on early Christianity, you may be shocked to discover that he argues the position that Christianity, or early Christianity that is, was essentially a communist movement. He says, and I quote, Christianity was originally a movement of oppressed people. It first appeared as a religion of slaves and emancipated slaves, of poor people, deprived of all rights, of people subjugated or dispersed by Rome. Both Christianity and the workers' socialism preach forthcoming salvation from bondage and misery. Christianity places its salvation in a life beyond, after death, in heaven. Socialism places it in this world, in a transformation of society. Both are persecuted and baited. Their adherents are despised and made the objects of exclusive laws, the former as enemies of the human race, the latter as enemies of the state, enemies of religion, the family, social order. And in spite of all persecution, nay, even spurred on by it, they forge victoriously, irresistibly ahead. Unquote. You see in this passage how Engels almost equates early Christianity with the socialist movement or the workers' movement today, saying that both essentially are movements of poor people, oppressed people, exploited people against the conditions of exploitation. Christianity, Engels says, for various reasons, placed the hope that all conditions of exploitation would be destroyed and would be eliminated in the hereafter in paradise. And socialism, Engels says, metaphorically speaking, wishes to build that paradise here on earth. Now I use this only metaphorically because as soon as I say something of that sort, your ears will stand up and you'll say, wait a second, this is utopian thought. And it is, if you take it very literally, because obviously in this material world, you cannot create a perfect world, you cannot create a heaven, you cannot create a paradise, but certainly you can create a better world. You can create a world in which there isn't hunger and suffering and exploitation and oppression. That is very possible. And that really is the purpose of Marxism, is to better the material conditions of this world. Now you can also see the same idea taken forward in Engels' writing on the German peasant wars of 1525, that is of course around the Protestant Reformation. When Engels studied the Protestant Reformation, he came to the conclusion that the Anabaptists and people like Thomas Munzer were really Christian socialists, were Christian communists, in fact, he uses this word. Why? Because Munzer and the Anabaptists believed that there should be absolute equality amongst persons and the community of goods. Whatever they have, they ought to share equally. Many Marxists took this idea forward. For example, Karl Kautsky, in his book Foundations of Christianity, which was published in 1908. Of course, Kautsky, in the imagination of Marxists, is or Marxist-Leninist rather, is a traitor, a renegade, so to speak. But I think if you look at his early work, you may disagree with his some of his ideas on imperialism and other things, but his early work, and specifically his work on Christianity, is absolutely phenomenal. In this work, he says that the early Christian community essentially had a proletarian character. It was composed of, you could say, ancient proletariats. It was a revolt of the working classes. Who were the working classes? What were their movements? The Zealots and the Essenes combined to become the Messianic community. And the Messianic community, essentially, Kautsky says, was a community of the oppressed. And they undertook a class struggle against the Roman Empire on the one hand, but also against those who were collaborating with the Roman Empire, the Jewish community, members of the Jewish community who were collaborating with the Roman Empire and had become very, very rich. And of course, the famous quotation from the Bible is, "Blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be fulfilled. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. But woe unto you that are rich, for you have received your reward, consolation. Woe unto you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for ye shall mourn and weep," unquote. My God, I mean, that is blatant, brutal, straightforward, unadulterated and unapologetic class struggle. Also, Kautsky points out that in the Gospels, you can see, for example, if you read the Gospels of St. John, Kautsky points out that the early Christians lived a completely communistic lifestyle. Jesus and his apostles lived in a commune. For example, Luke 13:11 mentions, "Whoever has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none, and whoever has food is to do likewise," unquote. So very clearly, the early Christian community did not believe that did not believe that any member of its own community could be allowed to go hungry. And if anyone had surplus, anyone had a little more, it was their duty, their obligation to feed those who were hungry, to clothe those who were hungry. And when I think about the movement of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, it's much the same in the early period of Islam, that it would be thought of as an impossibility that one of the Muslims should allow to go hungry or without cloth when others had great riches, etc. That would have been an impossibility in the time of the Prophet. Let's continue to Lenin. Lenin writes on religion that religion should be private in relation to the state, not necessarily in relation to the party or in relation to the theory of Marxism and so on and so forth. But religion must always be considered a private affair in relation to the state. The state ought not to be involved in any way in religion, either in promoting it or in stopping it. That really is, of course, is also the definition of a secular state. A secular state stays completely neutral in relation to religion. It cannot suppress religion, and it cannot promote religion. It cannot promote one religion at the expense of another. It just stays completely out of religion in every way, shape or form. Religion is purely left into the private domain as something that is a relationship between the individual and God that has nothing to do with politics whatsoever. And much the same way, sort of Lenin writes that religious workers, working class people should be part of the party, because he says, and I quote, "Unity in this really revolutionary struggle of the oppressed class for the creation of a paradise on earth is more important to us than unity of proletarian opinion on paradise in heaven." That is the reason why we do not and should not set forth our atheism in our program. No atheism in the program of the Communist Party. In other words, why? Because unity in changing the world as it really exists is much more important than unity about metaphysical ideas. You can have a different idea about what will happen in the world after this life, in the metaphysical world, and I can have a different idea. And yet both of us can agree that we need to build a society in which people are not so desperately poor that they have to beg on the streets of your country, of our country. And I think that is something that I agree with. We will never be able to come to a situation where everybody agrees on the finer points of philosophy about the material world and about the world, metaphysical world, the world hereafter, and so on and so forth. We'll never be able to do that. There are people of many, many different faiths in the world. There are people who have no faith in the world. There are so many different kinds of points of views in the world. And it would be impossible for us. I mean, we've been fighting for thousands of years over this, have we not? Religions have been fighting each other. Different sects within religions have been fighting each other. We're never going to come to an agreement on these things. I think it will be very, very difficult. Or if we come to an agreement on these things, it may take centuries. But we can come to an agreement on something very fundamental, on something very, very important, that poor people should not be exploited, that working people should not be exploited, that every human being deserves to live a life without extreme deprivation and poverty, that everyone should have a roof over their heads, that people should have access to healthcare, that people should have access to education, that people should have jobs, that people should have economic and job security, that they should not have to worry about their children starving to death, that they should not have to worry about their parents, being unattended by any healthcare physicians in their old age. These are fundamental, today we consider them to be fundamental human rights, and we can come to agree on those things, that we should build a society which eliminates poverty, which eliminates exploitation and oppression. And that really sums up the views of, let's say, Marx and Marxists with respect to religion. And that is why, as opposed to the anarchists who thought that, religion was sort of an irrational thing and wanted to ban religion from a future socialist society, Marxists are of the view that this is a very bad idea, it ought not to be done, and that every religion or religious group or religious interpretation should have the freedom to practice their religion as they think best, or to not practice religion if they think that is best. There should be complete religious equality and freedom, and the state should not interfere in that in any way, shape or form, and that the real role of the state and of society and of politics ought to be really to bring about a society where the exploitation of people comes to an end, oppression comes to an end, poverty, misery and hunger come to an end. Hope you enjoyed that lecture. Thank you very much.